Hey folks, how's it going? Great to have you all here. And this is a topic that's near and dear to Ben and my's heart. This is a conversation I think we have with almost every single founder and every single startup at some point in their journey. And so we're excited to broach the topic here in a small group session. So with that, before we dive in, let me kind of reintroduce Ben and me for those of you who haven't met us. Or have met us but haven't talked to us in a while. Next slide. So quick background on myself. I'm a partner here at Neotribe. In part, before joining Neotribe, I was the CEO founder of Stormpath, which is a developer API product for authentication. And we were acquired by Okta. At Okta, I ran all their developer products and then eventually moved into a VP of product and general manager role, taking brand new products to market. And prior to all of that, I've done everything from software developer to salesperson. But my real passion is in early go-to-market. And so I've known Ben for a very long time, well before we got to work together at Okta. In fact, Ben was instrumental to getting us funded in our first round of financing at Stormpath. But I'll let Ben introduce himself really quickly.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Sabrin. I'm currently the Chief Revenue Officer at ngrok. I've been in and around infrastructure, software, early stage startups now for about 20 years. Looking at my headshot, I realized that I probably need a new one because that's about 11 years old. But I guess I still look the same, which is good. And I've done a lot of early stage deals since then. But I love talking to early stage founders and helping think through starting to be that first salesperson. I personally have been that first salesperson a couple times in my career, and have then grown into leadership roles and still not afraid to go early and roll my sleeves up with founders to build a business. So happy to be here.
So this topic of getting your first salesperson is an enormous conversation. And we're not going to get through all of these questions, but these are the questions that Ben and I typically get when we talk to people like you. And for some of you who we've already talked to about this topic, you probably asked some subset of this. So what we're going to do is Ben and I are going to go through the first view. But my ask of you is take a look at these questions. And if any of them are the most burning ones for you, put them in the Q&A section. So click on the little Q&A button and add the question there, so that Ben and I know that you really want to cover one of these. And then as we start to talk about any of these topics, if you have any follow-up questions, also raise your hands with the Zoom feature, or put your question in the Q&A function, and we'll make sure that we get to it. This is meant to be highly interactive, which is why it's a small group session kind of for our insiders. And so feel free to ask whatever questions you want as we're going along. We will open up to a Q&A session, time permitting, at the end as well, just to make sure that we kind of answer whatever questions you have. But again, let's keep this highly interactive. Make sure you get your questions answered as we go through. With that, Ben and I always lament when we talk to people about, when they want to hire their first sales hire, the very first question that we put back on everybody is, well, are you ready for the first sales hire? And so that ends up actually being probably one of the most important questions for everybody to kind of be introspective around is, are you ready? So Ben, when you talk to founders, how do you guide them on whether or not they're ready to really go out and hire their first sales leads?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things that I think about. Number one is they've been successful getting at least two people to pay them that weren't their friends, right? So there's two real customers that have seen the value in what you're doing, that you've done. That's one of the things, and that number can be a lot larger if your deal size is much smaller. right? And it could be one if your deal size is very large, right? It provided that there's a pattern that it's applicable to others. I think the next thing that I think you should think about, just in terms of, are you capable and do you have the time to train this person at the level they need to be trained in your product, not in how to sell, in your product, what it does, the value proposition, what have you prepared? Because if you're not ready to spend a ridiculous amount of time with this person and really move from, that first founder seller to, you're probably, as a founder, there's probably decent technical acumen that you have. Right now, you're going to be like the sales engineer to that seller, and you're going to spend a lot of time with that person. But you also have to make sure that you have the cycles to dedicate to helping make that person successful. Yeah. So those are really the two big categories that I think about.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree. And if I were to put more color on that, when you go hire your first salesperson, you're really transitioning from a stage where you're trying to prove that people care about your product, and you're trying to now transition into a phase of the business where you're trying to prove that you can scale that. And the first hire is that first major step into that new phase. And I have found that it can be hard for first-time founders, especially technical founders, to understand that you can't just hire a rep and let them go. Like, you have to move into that role with them, because the trick is not, can that rep hit their number? The trick is, can you make that rep successful? And that nuance is a huge miss for a lot of people. That's not obvious if they've never been in go-to-market. And then the other point you made, Ben, was there's some repeatability, right? Now, we often talk about repeatability in the context of product market fit. Now, you're typically making this for a sales hire before you have product market fit. You might have proof of value, but you for sure do not have product market fit yet, because you haven't proven that you can make a team successful. But what you're looking for, to Ben's point, my own little metric is, you have at least 2 deals that are exactly the same or very close to the same, and ideally they're at like the 5-figure level. And the reason why I think the 5-figure level matters is that reps need to be able to feed themselves. And so if you're not closing deals at least in the 5-figure range, it's going to be very hard for a rep to make a quota that is going to justify their compensation. And so if you've got 2 deals, but they're all like, 1K, 2K, 3K, then a rep might not be the right answer. So the other question then, Ben, is, okay, great. We've decided that we want to hire a rep. How do you determine what kind of salesperson you need? Do you need an SDR? Do you need a BDR? Do you need an inside sales rep? Do you need a large enterprise field rep? Do you need a director level person or VP of worldwide sales out of HP? Like, how do you help people figure out what the right role is?
I mean, obviously a lot of it depends on what it is you're selling, what the price point is, the market that you're operating in, what you think the complexity of the sales cycle is, in terms of matching the right person to the job. If I was to create the best generalization, what I would say would be, you want to hire an AE, somebody who's been an account executive that's still on their way up, that hasn't necessarily moved into a leadership role yet, or they are, let's say, from some other discipline. I personally was a recruiter before I took my first sales job. I think that's actually a really good transition into selling. Recruiters are very curious, and tend to have good understandings of markets, and relationships. And so I would look for somebody on the ascent in the career, somebody who's really hungry, who wants to make a difference, And if you're hiring an AE, I tend to, especially at the early stage, don't get enamored with the brand of where that person worked, because you may have the greatest startup in the world. You don't really have a great brand. And so try to find somebody who's been successful selling for a company that didn't have a brand, because that means that they have a chance to be successful. If they've only been successful at places that are doing a lot of work to help make them successful, which you're just not going to be able to make that level of investment at this stage of your journey, that person may struggle. That's obviously a broad generalization, not always true, but directionally usually pretty correct, right? So that's probably the best way I would generalize.
Yeah. I would add to that is I'm typically pretty skeptical of senior executive hires in sales, because you don't need leaders at this stage. You need someone who's going to do the work.
Yeah.
And so someone who's coming in at who's formerly a manager or a manager of managers or a global VP, they might be amazing at what they do, but when all of a sudden they show up, there's nobody underneath them and they've got to go build their own book of business and go do outreach. That can be really challenging for them. They're going to push you to grow the team pretty quickly when you're not ready to. So I echo Ben's perspective, which is, that first person should be somebody who's either, currently a successful AE, or they've only recently moved into a manager role and still pretty comfortable doing their own outreach. This notion of talent coming from other disciplines, I think this is where Ben and I maybe disagree a little bit. I personally am heavily inclined to getting people who've sold something to your buyer, because it can be hard to teach someone how to sell to your buyer. So if someone's been an AE, but they've been selling, finance software or CRM, and now you want them to sell, database infrastructure, that can be pretty challenging transition, that I don't know personally that I would take the risk on.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think one of the other pieces of the initial question was, do you hire an SDR? Do you hire a BDR? And my best advice there is this. Those are folks that are going to need even more training and more attention than the AE, and you really need to have enablement nailed down in order to get them. And then you have to ask yourself the question, right? Do I have a top of funnel problem where I need somebody that's generating a lot of opportunities, but then I, the founder, am then going to go run those opportunities, and I feel confident in my ability to do that, so I know that the work that this other person is doing is going to pay off because I'm going to go follow through. If you don't fully grasp the sales process, getting more leads isn't necessarily going to drive the behavior that you want, right? And so I tend to caution people that just think they need demand gen to think twice before they go in that direction.
Yeah, let me echo that. I mean, I think a misconception that I run into often is that people think that SDRs and BDRs are sales, and they're not, right? They might have sales in the title, but they're really demand gen functions. And so then what I also hear is, well, I'm going to train my BDR or SDR to eventually become an AE. And I think that's actually pretty reasonable if you've got someone on staff who knows how to train an SDR to become an AE. And so if you've never managed AEs, I think it's a hard lift to train someone how to do that job. It is a hard lift even for professional managers to transition SDRs into AE. There's a lot of domain expertise that's got to get picked up. So I'm also typically pretty skeptical of AEs, SDRs and BDRs as your first hires, because it's really more demand gen and it's hard to transition into sales. One thing I'll also add is they tend to be really young. You don't find a lot of experienced SDR BDRs, and so there can be a bit of another type of learning, which is you're teaching them how to have their first job, and you're dealing with things that you're not used to dealing with some of your more experienced talent on the team. Okay, so with that, let's talk about sourcing. Hey, Ben, I've decided, everything Alex said, we've clicked into it. We've got repeatable sales. I now know what kind of AE I want. Where do I get started?
Good question. I think there's a couple routes to take. First, hire a recruiter. This either if you have a recruiter that's part of your company, great, get them focused on what you need, or there's plenty of firms that literally just focus on AEs and sellers, right? And are actively cultivating relationships with people that tell them, I want to go be the first salesperson somewhere. So that person's already thinking about it. So that's one. The other is if you've ever been a buyer of software that's similar to the product that you're building, think through the people that you've had the best experience with, that have sold to you. I think that's always a great place to go try to hire. I mean, I personally, that's one of the things that I'm doing right now as I build out ngrok. I've been pretty impressed with a couple people that I've encountered for some of the infrastructure that we're building out on the RevOps side of the house. And I've started conversations with them like, look, I think you're good at what you do. We're growing. I want to hire you. So I think those are two avenues that I would go down.
Yeah. I would add to that, leverage the network you already have. And so, the network you have isn't going to go very far, no matter how amazing your VCs are. We're obviously very good, but even with someone like me that has a big network of salespeople, I can only do so much. And so a recruiter is, I think, baseline, like first stage requirement. But regardless, then go to your network, your VCs, your friends, your family, and then start asking them who they know, and then also have them posted on social media. I mean, there is a lot of value to someone like me or Ben or another founder of another company posting on their channels about your role, because it is a pretty strong endorsement, perceived endorsement that your job and your company's legit. We got a question from Barzon at Kibo that I think is probably a good time to address, which is, okay, great. We know we want to hire an AE, but when should we start thinking about an SE, a sales engineer?
Good question. I think this all goes back to where I first started, which was, do you have the time to help make this person successful? Right. And typically a lot of that is you're going to be the SE. You're going to be the person who really understands the product. And if you don't think that that's the best place for you to spend time, or if you just don't have the time to dedicate to doing that, I would absolutely hire an SE. If you have a deeply technical product, like, if your product is an application that you're selling to an end user, the salesperson that you're hiring should be able to demo the product and do everything they need to do. And, yes, there may be some deep technical questions that you're going to need to have answered. But if you're in the world of like databases, security, infrastructure, developer tools, this is a technical product with a technical buyer. While you may hire a salesperson who's technically curious, they're not technical. They've never written code. And I also look.
But Ben, if we're building a deeply technical product, shouldn't our AE be deeply technical? Shouldn't our account executive be able to just operate without an SE?
So you want them to be curious, but you definitely want to surround them with the right people. I would say that. I'm also a big fan of what I call avoiding islands early in company building, right? And so if you pair an SE with an AE, pretty quickly, they're going to be connected, right? That because I will say this, and I've done it. the AE or the sales leader within an early stage startup sometimes is one of the loneliest places you could possibly be, right? And so, if you can afford to, and you have a deeply technical product, I would absolutely get a good SE as soon as possible. Because the other good thing about having an SE early in the process is they're probably not going to be 100% saturated in sales meetings. And so typically good SEs are really good at building, presentations, content, speaking at conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a good thing to hire.
So I'll tell you from personal experience, many, many moons ago, I took a sales job. I had gone from a computer. I've been a software developer, and then moved into becoming an AE. And I was deeply technical, so I was one of those rare AEs that didn't need an SE. And very quickly, my manager pulled me aside one day and is like, "You need to stop. You need to start pretending that you know less than you know, because what's happening is you're getting pulled into SE work, and we need you doing AE work." And so even if you are to magically hire an AE that's deeply technical and can operate without an SE, they're going to become a lot less productive. AE's job is to find, qualify, validate, and then drive towards a close opportunities. And that's a lot of conversations with stakeholders and buyers and just grinding the opportunity through the organization. An SE's job is very different. That SE's job is there to really understand technical requirements, line up how technical requirements are going to map to the product, do diagramming, POCs, very labor intensive, but they're very different from grinding a deal forward. And so, even if your AE can do it, you don't really want to mix concerns. But back to the question of, when do you hire this SE? I'm typically pretty skeptical of hiring the AE and the SE at the same time, mainly because you just don't have the time to onboard both of them. It's hard enough to onboard one function. Onboarding two functions I just don't know how you do it at that stage. And so I'm a big fan, personally, of founders being SEs or the product management being SEs at the very beginning until you're onboarding your second AE. By the second AE, you're going to get tapped out pretty fast. Now you've got two AEs trying an opportunity. There's not just way too much SE work. And then it's a good time to start bringing in an SE and onboarding them. But I would onboard the AE first before you start to expand into SE. Okay, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to answer one of the questions in Q&A, which is, okay, now we've magically found this AE. Hopefully we'll go back and talk about how to filter and pick the right AE. But let's say we found the right AE, we've brought them on board. How do you onboard your first AE and provide that ongoing engagement?
Go old school and just hand them a phone book and tell them to start dialing. No. No, in all seriousness. So if I think back to Earl, when I sat in that first salesperson's chair 20 plus years ago at JBoss, I came in and Mark's like, "All right, I'm going to go through our intro to JBoss training with you, which is for engineers, but I want you to really understand the product, and I will explain it in a way that you're going to," and he literally took me through a 4-day class. We didn't obviously do the labs, and then walked me through. We had customers, but walked me through the nature of some of those customer relationships, how they started, and then was always there to answer any questions that I had, right? And he was my SE. We would get into conversations with big companies, and I was the salesperson and Mark was the sales engineer, and that worked really, really well. So that's how I would think about onboarding them. Don't feel like you need to have all the tools in place, all of your processes defined. Like, don't deal with that. You're focused on how do I get the knowledge, right? And allow this person to tell our story as good or better than the way I've been able to tell our story. And that's what you should be focused on.
I love that answer. And actually, I'm going to piggyback on that for a second, because one of the biggest mistakes I see in onboarding your first AE, or let's call it the first 3 AEs, is you'll eventually find an AE who is pounding the table for more tooling and more products and more process. And I have found that to be a really big trap in the very, very early stage. And so I've seen teams just go out and buy everything that the AE thinks they need, because and what I typically have found, again, this is generalizations, is that it wasn't that the company needed more tooling, is that they hired the wrong AE. They hired an AE that was coming from a very structured sales organization where everything was already set up for them, and they were heavily leveraging tooling, and that's just not going to be your company, right? The right early stage AEs are going to be the ones who can come in and operate without all of this, all of these harnesses and all of this infrastructure, because that stuff takes a long time to build. So as you're onboarding an AE, if they start to push back on you tremendously that they need all of these tools and all of these systems, that should be a spidey sense that you may need to spend a bit more time with that person and see what the real problem is. But the other thing that I've seen done really well as you're onboarding people is some companies have been recording their sales calls. They're using a Zoom bot. I'm going to go plug one of our portfolio companies that's currently on the call, Sybil.ai. I think
happy customer,
yeah.
and that is absolutely part of our onboarding. Literally, we share calls with all of our new AEs. We'll then even schedule, basically like, what did you learn from that call? What questions do you have? With where we've gotten to with call recording, that's a key asset in enablement and onboarding.
Yeah, because imagine, right? Like a rep can suddenly go through 10 sales calls the first day they show up, or alternatively, they would have had to manage those 10 sales calls after they showed up, which means you're saving 2 weeks worth of onboarding. And you can annotate them, you can have all kinds of call notes afterwards. Like it's pretty powerful, and I've seen it done pretty well. So yeah, ride-alongs is what old reps used to call this stuff, and now recordings.
Yeah, now you can rapid fire it. The other thing I would say is try to at least spend the time and sketch out like what the first 2 weeks look like on literally like a day-by-day basis. And then, consistently try to refine that as you add more people. That's one of the things we do. We've got to here's your first 2-week plan. Here are the things we expect you to do. Here's what we're going to do with you, and we'll work to get that person up to speed.
Yeah. I'm going to put a pin in a question here. I'm going to get back to it, Ben, which is, how do you know if someone's onboarding properly and whether or not you got to put them on plan? But let's get back to that in a second. Barzan asked a question. So Barzan asked, hey, as a founder, I've tried being the SE for my AE, but the problem is that I have started doing the AE's job myself on the calls and driving the entire conversations. That means I haven't given my AE the room to grow into his actual job. What are your thoughts on that, Ben?
I mean, it's a good thought. I mean, my first instinct is, if you are mindful of your behavior that you're doing that, can you try to take that step back, right, and resist the urge to drive the conversation? And more importantly, I would say, have a conversation with your AE up front and say, look, you're driving this conversation. Here's the role that I'm going to play. Yes, I'm the CEO and I'm the founder, but I am the technical resource, right? you need to drive the rest of the conversation and see how that happens. If they can't carry that torch, well, they may not necessarily be the right person, or your instincts may be right in that they're not comfortable being that person with you as the SE, potentially, especially based on the fact that maybe you have displayed the behavior in the past that you are controlling the conversation. So they may be, not wanting to say the wrong thing, which may make sense to then, step out and either have your, product management leader, jump in from an SE perspective, or hire an SE. That's kind of the way I would.
Yeah. Hey, Barzan, were you able to unmute? I see you unmuted.
Okay, so thanks so much. I really appreciate it. That makes a lot of sense. I think you're right. I think I just my own feeling is like I need to get out of his way, and I think it takes some conscious effort for me to be on the call and resist the temptation to jump in and try to close the deal. One thing that's related to what you both mentioned earlier is, like, sometimes, at least as a founder, like, I've never been selling stuff before. Like, sometimes I feel like there's a lot of stuff that AEs, how should I say it? Like, I feel like I'm at the loss when I work with large enterprise deals, and which is why we start actually hiring AEs, because when you were both talking about like when to hire AEs, it just like came across as like, I can go figure out how to sell to an enterprise buyer over the next 6 months and fail, or take a long time to learn on the job, where I can just bring an AE who has that know-how. What are your thoughts on that? Like, is that actually as rocket science as I make it sound like to myself, or is it something that you want to just, if you're selling to enterprise buyers, just bring an AE who knows how to do that and save yourself and the company time?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what Ben and I said earlier, right? Like, I think for the first 1 or 2 deals, like, it has to be founder driven, right? Because you don't even know what works yet. And so if you don't know what works, an AE is going to show up and they're going to be clueless, right? Because they need a playbook, right? That's, if I can put one kind of really simple concept in everybody's head, is like, until you have some semblance of a playbook, it's very hard to bring an AE in, because they're going to expect some semblance of a playbook. The best AEs can operate with a minimal playbook, but they still need something to start with. So you will need to go do your first 2 deals. But once they show up, the thing I would challenge you, and Barzan, you and I have had this conversation offline, but I'll kind of share it for the group, which is, I'll challenge all of you to the goal, once you bring an AE in, isn't as much to grow revenue anymore, right? You can grow revenue by yourself, right? But that's no longer the goal once an AE shows up. Once an AE shows up, the goal is to prove that someone other than you drive revenue.
Right.
And so
and that it's repeatable.
Yeah. And so if you're not creating space for the AE, you might still be closing deals, but the organization isn't learning. And you're not getting closer to product market fit. You're just getting closer to your revenue milestones, which is not exactly the same thing. You're getting to the right metric, but it's not reflecting what it should be reflecting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense, actually. I appreciate that sharing. I mean,
That
just
being said,
what I was saying was like, I've sold plenty times actually to our mid-market customers, but like when it came to, okay, now we have a few enterprise deals in the pipeline, that's what I felt like I didn't really know how to do it myself. But you're right, like I should probably figure it out myself even for that.
Yeah. I will add one more thing, which is, as a founder, it can sometimes be unnerving to let an AE take over a call, in particular when the call gets really technical. And that's okay, right? The thing I'll also kind of challenge, and this is actually something that was part of our interview process at Stormpath, we would purposefully put them into a mock sales call where we would get very technical with the AE, more technical than we knew that AE could handle, on purpose. And we would just start peppering them with really technical questions. The best AEs will stop the conversation and punt on it and be like, let me set up time with the SE separately. And then they will drive the conversation to cover the sales topics right?
Yep.
Do you budget? Do you have a need? What's your time frame? Who's the right person to buy, right? What are the things you really care about? The best AEs will try and avoid or separate the technical conversations from the business conversations.
Yeah, the best AEs are not afraid to use the words "I don't know." Yeah, I don't know. Let me get back to you. And let me bring in a resource that is capable of answering that question for you. Back to one of the things that Alex mentioned. A playbook. By no means does the playbook need to be exhaustive. I would say if I was looking for like MVP of a playbook that you need that you can direct a rep, at least the one or two key use cases that you solve, and the key personas that you need to talk to that need to solve that use case, right? Until you understand like just those two basic things, you're not going to be able to bring in anybody to make them successful. And that's the basic minimum, right?
So we have another question here, which is, what is a good target for an early sales executive? Should she make up 70% of her salary in 1 year or more, or should we be okay with less? Hey, can we give them access? Can we give them the mic so that they can add a little more color to the question? All right, Gaurav, can you hear us?
Hey, Alex. Hey, Ben. So yeah, my question is like, when you're hiring the early sales person, right, that will help you close like the first few deals after you've had your two customers that are paying were not your friends. So you met that criteria. Now you hire this AE. What's like a good target? Like, I mean, if let's say, imagine we are paying her like, 150K annual salary. I mean, this is in some ways now we are incurring cost of sale, right? And so what's a good target? Like, I mean, should she give me like, I mean, over a period of time, of course, she'll be making multiple times of her revenue, hopefully, right? I mean, that's what we are driving towards. But what's a good sort of low bar for her to clear in our, like, in the founder's head in terms of, okay, I'm getting this person. Obviously, like, first year, it's an expense item for me, but as long as they make X%, I'm good. Like, what is that X%?
All right. I think I know why Alex is smiling, and I'm probably smiling the same thing. I think we're going to say the same thing. If you would be happy with 70% of a rep salary, guess what? They're not going to be happy with their overall total compensation. And more importantly, at that rate, you're probably not ready to hire your first salesperson.
Okay.
Right. If you don't think like, I think you need to be thinking that you can generate, I would say conservatively, like this is the worst case scenario. At least 1x, you can quota them at least 1x their OTE. I'll give you a frame of reference. Like right now, I'm starting everyone who joins ngrok right now. We have product market fit. We're a bootstrap business that has real customers, but we haven't done sales before. But first year, I'm expecting 2.5x.
Yeah.
Right.
I would say I would get even more conservative than Ben. I would say if it's not at least 1.5x, you're toast.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. And because once again, like, let's say you're paying her 150K, most likely she's on a 50-50 plan, 150-300, right? And if she's on a 150-300, if she's only delivering 70% of 150, that means she's not making money. And most reps don't want to make, good reps are not interested in their base salary.
Yeah. So let me actually, I'll try and separate two concepts because I think there's a lot kind of embedded in this question. So one concept is, what should your quota to OTE ratio is? For those of you who don't know, OTE is called on target earnings. That is reps total compensation once you include bonuses, commissions, and salary. So if your rep has an OTE of 150, what should their quota be? Now, that number, we can debate all day long, but I think the more helpful thing is to work backwards. When you go raise your Series A, a Series A investor is going to be looking at that ratio.
Mhm.
And maybe maybe they'll give you a bit more wiggle room, but what a Series B investor is going to look for is a 4 to 5x ratio.
Mhm.
And so you eventually need to get to a 4 to 5x ratio. Otherwise, the later stage VCs are going to say, well, you don't have an efficient sales model. Your business isn't really ready to scale. And so you can start wherever you want, but you need to get there pretty fast. Now, there's a separate question of, hey, what does product market fit look like? Again, working backwards. Product market fit for enterprise sales companies tends to look, if you look at the literature, there's a great book called The Sales Learning Curve by article on Harvard Business Review by Mark Leslie on kind of how organizations learn to sell. And so if you buy into his concepts, it's roughly when the entire sales organization, a sales manager, the AE, maybe another AE and an SE, all of their fully loaded compensation is I guess they're delivering 1.5 that number. And so when that sales organization is paying for itself and then a little bit extra, that's when you've hit product market fit. And so you want to work backwards to then figure out how you get this person properly paid and properly quoted.
But Alex,
The concept that I want to kind of pair on this is how much should you pay a rep, or how should you think about rep compensation? A really common issue that we see on this side of the table is AEs want to keep sales compensation low, right? They want to cap the reps upside. They want to come in a little bit lower than OTE for whatever reason. I strongly recommend against that. I'm a really big believer that sales compensation should be uncapped, and you want your reps not just hitting OTE. It should be the minimum bar. You really want them to overachieve, because if they don't, one, they're going to quit, and losing a rep is hard. But if they do start to overachieve, they're going to tell their friends, and it's going to be easier and easier to attract top sales talent. But anyways, Gaurav, I know you had a follow-up question.
Yeah, my follow-up question was in certain models, where the market is set that you can price your solution at a few $100,000 because there's a precedence, and you can make sort of big numbers from a few customers, right? I mean, your average sales volume are pretty high in terms of your initial customers. That might be possible, but if we are doing a subscription model, $5-10 per employee per customer, you have some kind of a SaaS subscription model. Your initial sales, you're also targeting not big customers with thousands of employees, but few hundred employees. So you do need volumes, and they may not add to a lot of sales number, but it's building the traction story before you can go and target the IBMs of the world with 100,000 employees or whatever, right? Yeah. So in that sort of business scenario, it's very hard to set an expectation that a sales executive will come in and pay 3 times their sort of their salary. They're kind of like a business partner in some ways in helping establishing that product market fit with smaller customers, right? So how do you any sort of tips in terms of, and this would have been a case for people like Slack and that grew on low volume.
This is an amazing question. Ben and I talk about this all the time. Okay, so basically, let me try and reinterpret your question really fast, which is, what do you do when you've got small deals? Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Ben, take it away.
So there's a couple things. Number one is build a self-service motion and a product-led growth motion that, if you think about some of the brands that you just mentioned, salespeople weren't selling Slack in the early days, right? The product Slack was selling Slack, and people were signing up for it and, putting a credit card in and paying for it, right? Then eventually, once you establish the fact that a good chunk of the market wants to buy this and there's an opportunity to go sell, larger and larger allotments of that product, then you want to start hiring some salespeople. If you do have a really small price point, then you want to think about like inside sales as a way. If you really think it's something that you can't do self-service, and I challenge that notion, especially in today's day and age. Most products that you're charging a couple dollars per month for, you should be able to figure out how to push people into some sort of self-service flow. Otherwise, the economics in the early in the early days are going to be really hard to justify putting sales resources against.
Yeah, I find that there's a physics to how many deals a rep can process. And an SMB deal is not marginally that harder to sell than a mid-market deal or an enterprise deal compared to the amount of revenue you're going to generate.
Correct.
So a rep can only close so many deals a year, and if those deals don't add up to big enough number, it's going to be really hard for you to justify a rep's existence. So again, my general rule of thumb is if your ACV, your average contract value, annual contract value, is not in the 5 figures, it's just too hard to make an AE. It's too hard to make an AE work inside or field. What you'll find, Ben and I joke about this, you know how the number pi shows up in nature in a million different ways. In go-to-market, the number 50K ACV shows up, right? If you can sit here and do all the math you want on what like the right ACV should ultimately be, but kind of like the number pi, all your calculations ultimately end up somehow magically landing you a 50K ACV. And so if you're going to have a sales force, you eventually want to see line of sight to an ACV of 50K. You don't have to start there, but you need to at least be in the 5-figure range so that you have a path to getting there once you're in market and scaling and properly hit product market fit. I'm going to pin in that question and jump back over to Shruti's call. What is the time to productivity for reps in your experience, Ben, for a 6-figure land, small and medium enterprise sale?
Oh man, I think if I had the canned answer to this question, we would. It's like it's like the Rosetta Stone. It really all depends. I mean, you should always strive to get a rep fully ramped in 6 months or less. I mean, that should be your target. Obviously, the faster you can do it, the better off you are. I remember when we were building MongoDB in the early days, I was able to get reps ramped in less than 4 months. And that was owning a $1.5 million AC. Well, actually, it was a $1.5 million TCV number at the time because we didn't have a lot of money.
TCV is total contract value. That's ACV multiplied by the number of years a contract is going to live.
Right. But we were ramping people really fast. So I remember showing that to some VCs and they're like, you have a hiring problem. You need to hire more people because you're ramping them really fast. Right. But I think that's the right number. Personally, like my goal right now is by the end of 6 months, I've got my reps fully ramped. And the way I'm doing that is I'm expecting 0 productivity for them in the first quarter. And then 50% of their productivity in the second quarter. And then they're fully ramped going into their third quarter. If you can hit that, your payback on your investment is going to be in line with where you need it to be.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we only have a few minutes left. Are there any other questions from the audience before I pepper some? Here we go. Okay. So yeah, if you have any questions, post them. I'm reading one of them that just came through right now. Okay, I'm gonna read something that Barzan wrote. Barzan, thank you for stroking my ego. But quote unquote, One really good piece of advice that I once got from Alex was not to have quarterly quotas for AE and just define and fix the quota for the whole year so that you don't have to renegotiate quota every quarter. But one challenge is that we set the quota to 2.5x OTE initially since we didn't have enough data. So how do we increase quota to get to a 4 to 5x OTE without losing the AE by raising your quota? Ben?
Ooh, oh man.
I'll take a crack at it then, Ben.
So look, I think part of it is this. Very, very simple. Yeah. There's 2 words of advice that I give every AE that I hire in an early stage company, right? And that are, number 1, your territory will never be bigger and your quota will never be lower, right? So once we understand those 2 things, right, you're going to understand how we're going to grow, right? And oh, by the way, I gave you equity in this business. And if you gave this early AE meaningful equity, they should hopefully have their eye on the bigger prize. And they should be thinking not just about their W-2, but about the business, right? And so that's one of the, I think, and so communicating that is key, right? The other thing too is like, if all of a sudden you're trying to stretch out to 4 to 5x prematurely, right? I just caution, like, if you don't have the data, if you're not confident that you can get, let's say, 80% of your reps to hit quota at 4 to 5x OTE, right? Then your quotas are probably too high.
I will add an opinion, which is, and again, it's an opinion, so, take it with a grain of salt. I would move heaven and earth to avoid changing quotas. Like, there is no faster way of destroying trust with a rep than to change their quota. Like, I have seen great reps quit like immediately when their quotas get changed mid-year. It's just massively detrimental to morale.
Right.
And so, which is part of the reason why I keep urging anybody who will listen to me, which is, don't feel bad about paying reps more money if they earned it, right? So if you gave them 2.5x OTE and they come in at 4, you should be celebrating the massive check you're writing them. And that rep is going to feel like a god, and you're going to have an even more productive rep that's helping you recruit other reps because they're crushing.
That's the story you want. You want that story out in the market, knowing that people can come make a bunch of money selling your software, and they're crushing it. Look, if you're focused on optimizing cost of sales as an early stage Series A, even potentially Series B company, I think you're focused in the wrong area. Right? Your cost of sales shouldn't be your top concern at that stage of growth, right? Your concern should be product market fit, repeatability. I've proven that I can, add water and watch the business grow, right? Not, what does the bottom line look like? Yes, we have economic models and, investment dollars are maybe a little bit more expensive now than they used to be. But still, even then, cost of sales is never the metric to look at early stage in the journey. Now I will say one tip that like what I'm doing right now, I'm not afraid to give people 6-month comp plans. And I do it under the guise of we both don't know what we don't know, right? I don't want to be wrong in that I'm paying reps too much because the quotas are too low. And I don't want to be wrong that I'm not paying reps enough and the quotas are too high, right? Especially as you're in this early stage of data gathering. Now, that becomes a lot more attainable, if reps have been, granted, equity that you can talk about as meaningful. Go ahead.
Hey, Ben, I know we're about to go over, but I'm going to ask you two questions that are separate, but I know the answer you're going to give, so I'm going to pair them together.
Okay. Got a little time, actually. We're good.
Yeah. So when reps are ramping, how does their commission work? If the target is 0 for the first quarter, then I assume we pay them 100% of commission regardless. That's question one. And then the other question is, many people talk about accelerators. Should we be thinking about accelerators for the first sales hires, or is this overcomplicating the sales time?
So let me make sure I understand. If their quota is 0
For the first quarter,
and they sell something or they sell nothing, should you pay them 100%?
Mm-hmm.
Right. It all depends on what you agreed to with that person. Like if you agreed to give them what's called a ramp or a draw, where you are paying them during that learning curve, then yes, you would pay them. If you did not negotiate any kind of draw up front, while all you're doing with that first quarter is you're saying, I don't expect anything from you, right? In quarter one, I want you to come in and learn, right? But if there's no draw, they get paid on what they sell, right? And you can figure out their commission percentage in one of two ways. You can figure it out based on a ramp, right? So you could say, take the 0 quota in quarter one, 50% quota in quarter two, full quota in quarter three and quarter four. Let's say they're starting January 1st. And so therefore, then you would aggregate that into the total number that you would expect for them. You would take that number, you would divide it by their on target earnings, and that gives you a base rate, right? And that's what you would pay out. And they should make 100% of their OTE if they hit that number times that percentage. The other option to do during ramp, which is what I'm doing right now, I said, you know what, we're going to use 2.5x, which is a very low number. And thus that comes out to be, the math worked out to 20%, which is typically an accelerated rate. We're just going to pay everybody during ramp at 20% for everything that they do. And so, but no accelerators for this year, because we just don't know what we don't know. Right. But it also goes back to, we make sure that reps have equity that can matter. Right. If you view reps as, they don't participate in equity the way everybody else does because they get paid commissions, then they're only going to care about their commissions, and they're not going to think about business building and company building.
Yeah. So, which I think is to kind of summarize that, reps are trained to make money. That's their job. And the best reps are very good at it, but they're also focused on making money for themselves. And so the best reps are going to try and engineer how they're going to make the most money. Mm-hmm. The comp plan you put in front of them is what they're going to try and hack to make the most money. So the more alignment you have around you making money and them making money, the better it's going to be. The simpler that comp plan, the less gaming you're going to see in the system, which is going to drive more alignment.
Yeah.
And so bring that back to this question. In the early days, if you want your rep focused on generating revenue, that's what you want their sole focus to be, then creating a comp plan that has accelerators and focus them on overachieving and driving the number higher and higher and higher is great, because that's going to sharpen the rep's focus. Conversely, if you want the rep to figure stuff out and work with you to find product market fit, even if that might not be 100% aligned with generating most revenue month to month, then something like equity is a lot more valuable, because then they're trying to build the business. But you're going to get the behavior you compensate and measure from the rep.
There's an old saying that says compensation breeds behavior. So like, good example, one of the things that I've built into our comp plans on top of the 20% rate is for any customer that agrees to be a part of our customer reference program, which consists of several things, we'll pay the rep an incremental $1,500 as long as that deal's over 10K ARR, right? And that actually incents my reps to even take some of my self-service customers and convert them into ARR and get them referenceable. And I won't pay them on the ARR because they're not growing it per se, because they're already paying us, but they'll have a mechanism to get paid that will help the business, right? We want more references about all the good things that people are doing with our product. And that's driving behavior, which is exactly what I want.
Yeah. The other thing I would add to this whole like compensation thing is like, keep it simple. One of the mistakes that, I mean, even professional, super experienced sales executives get into all the time is they start to add all of these different ways reps can make money. I'll give you an example. Like many, many years ago, I was at IBM, they got really creative and I got paid a quota on revenue and I had a separate quota on profit. And I had all these incentives for reference accounts or accounts where I did a cross sale for other products. Like I had all of these ways of making money beyond just like one quota. And when you start to get too voluminous in all the different levers for a rep, it gets very hard for the reps. And so the average rep their eyes will just glaze over and they just don't even know how they're making money anymore, which is what happened to a lot of IBM reps. The worst, like the more insidious reps will start to game the system, right? They'll figure out that, you know, as you were something super complicated comp plan, you like miss this one thing. And so all of a sudden they realize they can just keep hitting this one button and maximize their revenue and not necessarily maximize outcome for the company. And so as much as Ben and I might talk about accelerators or bonuses or whatever, those are all great ways to drive behavior, but just make sure you're keeping it all very, very simple. You know, a revenue goal, potentially accelerators if they overachieve quota. I'm a big fan of accelerators, and then maybe one, maybe two additional little bonuses they can get per account. But I wouldn't make it too complicated, especially in the early stage.
Yeah, I echo that.
Yeah.
Simplicity is bliss.
Hey, Jamili, I know we were answering your question. Did you have any follow-ups to that? I don't know if we want to unmute her.
Is there like a standard kind of template for creating some of these sales plans?
Excel.
Okay.
I mean, it's honestly, it's math, right? I'm sure you could find some good detailed comp plans out there. But it's really as mathematical as it gets, right? Just divide. Oh, there you go. Just divide the quota by the OTE and it gives you a percentage and then walk it from there.
All right, cool. Thank you.
But yes, to answer your question, Jamie Lee, I haven't seen one, which is actually honestly surprising to me. It shouldn't. It is rocket science to put the stuff together like in a perfect way, but at the early stage, we can hop on a call offline.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'm happy to help. I mean,
I think what I'm
connected.
Hearing from you guys is like, it's super important that your first rep makes money. And so, despite the guidance of 4x, 5x, you might want to create something where they're just like obviously going to make money the first time around or like for that first person, and then maybe you optimize from there on what it looks like for the second, third rep, et cetera.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a careful balance between keeping the rep happy and fed and setting yourself up for the right sales efficiency that you're going to be measured on when it's time to raise your next round.
Yeah. But it all goes back to, expectation setting is very powerful. I won't charge royalties for using my, 2 things you should tell every rep. And I'll repeat it. Your territory is never going to get bigger and your quota is never going to be lower. Right. And most reps know that, their compensation is a math equation based on their quota divided by OTE. So that means the rates that they're going to get are going to consistently get lower as their quota increases. And their quota increasing is not that the company just, wants to do better from them. It's just because the opportunity is getting better. Right. And the company, theoretically, we're going to do more for you to help you hit a bigger number because of the investments that we're making.
Hey guys, so Ben, we've got 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
Anything that you feel strongly that everyone on this call should know that we haven't already asked?
Oh man. It's a good question. I think that, look, if I was to say, number one skill I look for in early stage reps is curiosity, right? Second kind of, and now I'm talking about like innate strengths, innate characteristics that the person has, not the, what you see, but the kind of things you don't see. I also think finding people that are really competitive, where they've, been disciplined in their past, whether it's, they were an athlete, something along those lines. I know you hear people say that it actually matters. The first 2 reps I hired at ngrok, one played hockey at Brown, the other played basketball at Brown. And I think that's helpful. Like they're disciplined. They know how to prepare themselves for success. Right.
They know how to grind.
Yeah. And then exactly. And they know how to grind. They understand what hard work is, because that's the other thing, you need to make sure that the person that you're about to hire is prepared to have the same, they're never going to have the exact same level of passion as you, the founder, but you hope it's really, really close. Right. I think back to when I was super early in my career and helping build JBoss. I worked 18 hours a day and I didn't care. Right. I loved every minute of it. Right. And that was because there was so much to do. And at the time I was, one rep that was covering the globe. Right. And so I would start my day, talking to people in Europe, and I would end my day talking to people in Asia. Right. And hit the US in between. And so you want to find somebody who's got that drive and that want to really dig in and put in the effort. That's it. That's all I'd say.
Awesome. Well, I will add one thing that we didn't cover, which is how to know when your rep's not working out. Right. So if you hire 3 reps and 2 of them work out and you have to fire 1, you're doing a great job.
You're doing amazing. Yeah, you're doing
You're
great.
amazing. But you can't wait until they're hitting or missing quota to make that assessment. You can typically get a pretty good sense, I think, in the first 3 to 6 months, because there are leading indicators on rep performance. My favorite leading indicators are activity. How many meetings are they getting? In particular, if you don't have an SDR organization yet, like how much outbound are they doing? How many meetings are they getting? And then I think that, to me, the crown jewel of all of it is, what is their qualified pipeline?
Yeah, qualified pipe is, and that's the thing you can dig into on a weekly basis. You can understand how they're progressing in building qualified pipeline, because you should be having weekly pipeline review, forecast review calls with them. And if they're not landing qualified pipe, that's the biggest signal that says they may not be the right person.
And for those of you who haven't been brainwashed by either of us on qualified pipeline, what that means is the customer is ready and qualified to buy something. And so there's a lot of different ways of measuring that. I use a really simple acronym that was taught to me way back when, which is BANT. They have budget. You know who the authority is in the organization, you know who the buyers are and the influencers and who's the budget holder. And those people are engaged and they care and they have a burning need. Like they have a problem and they know they want to solve it. And they're going to make a decision in a reasonable time frame. That's a very simple model. There are much more complicated models out there, but I think if you're just focusing on a rep qualifying those and making sure that our pipeline has cleared those, I think that's a good place to start. Shutri, and I'll leave this because this is a great comment. So thank you, Shutri. Her parting words to us, Ben, are that we should publish a book.
Oh, that's great. Let's find a writer.
Let's find a writer.
Write it. I'll give them the
ideas. And her suggested title, which I think is wonderful, is How to Salesify in Early Stage. And
that's a good title.
Katie, who's our marketing person on the call, I hope you're taking notes here.
Katie, Ben, let's start writing a book.
Ben and I need a ghostwriter. Awesome.
Yeah, if it wasn't for Grammarly, I couldn't write email.
I know, man.
Forget about a book.
Dude, I mean, check out Jasper AI. You don't even have to write anything. You just have the AI write stuff for you.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time, man. I know. But as always, a pleasure. And thanks for all the attendees making it and asking good questions. Hopefully, this was valuable to you. If any of you have any follow-on questions on anything we discussed, or you end up having a light bulb moment tonight or tomorrow, and you want to ask more questions, feel free to reach out to us.
For sure.
We're happy to answer questions offline.
All right. Take care, y'all.